The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects as Ethan stumbled through his lines for the 7th time. He was 10, but in this moment, he looked 7. His shoulders slumped, lips dry, the exhaustion pressed into the skin beneath his eyes. "Again!" Marcus snapped, his voice cracking through the studio like a whip. "You think casting directors care that you're tired? You think the world waits for forgetful kids?" Behind the observation glass, Amira watched her little brother wobble. Her fists clenched. He had been at it for nearly 3 hours. 3 hours without water. 3 hours without rest. 3 hours that looked more like punishment than preparation. "Marcus," she said, stepping into the studio. Her voice was calm, but her heart was not. "He needs a break." Marcus turned, smile slow and sharp. "Did I ask for your opinion?" Her breath caught. "I'm Ethan's legal guardian, Amira, not you." That word again. Guardian. He'd used it like a weapon since the day he got it. Since the day the court believed a man with a production company and a website over a 23-year-old waitress working double shifts to pay rent. Ethan's knees buckled mid-sentence. He crumpled to the ground. Amira didn't wait. She rushed in, dropped beside him, pulled him into her arms. He was burning. "I'm okay," he whispered, voice dry. "Mr. Marcus says I can rest after this take." "You're done," Amira said. Her arms tightened around him. Marcus stepped forward. "You're ruining his shot at Riverside Productions. Do you know how many kids would crawl over broken glass for this chance? He's a child, not a career." Marcus's tone hardened. "He's an opportunity, one I'm helping realize. What are you helping with exactly? Tips and bus schedules?" She didn't answer, just carried Ethan out. But at the doorway, Marcus called after her. His voice dipped in mock sweetness. "Sweet dreams, buddy. Tomorrow's your big break." Outside, the air hit cold. Ethan coughed into her shoulder. Small, dry, fragile. "Can I really miss school tomorrow?" She hesitated, then lied. "No, baby. You're going to school." "But Mr. Marcus said—" "I'll handle him." But even as she said it, she didn't believe it. They reached her rusted Honda. She opened the door and froze. Across the lot, an elderly woman stood near the fence, watching. Their eyes met. The woman didn't look away. She nodded. Once, then turned and disappeared into the dark. "Who was that?" Ethan asked. Amira stared. "I don't know," but she had a feeling that whoever the woman was, she had been watching for a reason. Back in the studio, Marcus was on the phone. "Yeah, the kid's gold. The sister? Soft. I'll handle her." He glanced at the script Ethan had dropped, then picked up a contract from the drawer. Unsigned, binding, no school clause. 5 years. He smiled. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Ethan stumbled through his lines for the 7th time. His small frame trembled, dark circles carved beneath his eyes. A 10-year-old boy who looked closer to 8 from exhaustion. "Again," Marcus's voice cracked through the empty studio like a whip. "You think directors care that you're tired? You think they'll pick a kid who can't even remember 3 sentences?" Amira's hands clenched into fists behind the observation window. She'd watched her little brother pushed to his limits for 3 hours now. 3 hours of Marcus demanding perfection from a child who should have been home doing homework, maybe playing video games, living the childhood she'd fought so hard to protect. "Marcus, he needs a break." The words left her mouth before she could swallow them. The studio fell silent. Marcus turned slowly, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Did I ask for your opinion, Amira? Last I checked, I'm Ethan's legal guardian." "Not you!" The words landed like punches. Legal guardian. 2 years ago, when their mother passed, Marcus had swooped in. their mother's boyfriend of barely 6 months, and convinced the court he could provide stability. Financial stability, he'd argued. A career in entertainment for Ethan. Opportunities Amira, a 23-year-old waitress, couldn't dream of offering. But this wasn't opportunity. This was something else entirely. Ethan's legs gave out mid-scene. He crumpled to the floor, and Amira burst through the door before Marcus could bark another command. "Ethan!" She dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms. His body burned with fever. "I'm okay, Mira," he whispered, using his childhood name for her. "Just one more take, then Mr. Marcus says I can rest." Her heart shattered. He was apologizing, defending the man who was breaking him. "You're done for today." Amira lifted her brother, his weight frighteningly light against her chest. She met Marcus's glare with her own. "He's sick. He's going home." "Home!" Marcus laughed, a sound without warmth. "This is the audition for the Riverside Productions commercial. Do you know how many kids would kill for this chance? How much this could change his career?" "He's 10 years old. He doesn't need a career. He needs a childhood." "What he needs," Marcus said, stepping closer, "is someone who understands this industry, not a sister playing make-believe guardian. The court already decided who's best for Ethan. Or have you forgotten?" The reminder stung worse than any slap. 6 months ago, Amira had filed for guardianship. She'd presented evidence, character witnesses, a stable job. But Marcus had lawyers, industry connections, and documentation of Ethan's promising career trajectory. The judge had barely glanced at her before denying the petition. "Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., Marcus continued, pulling out his phone. "Ethan has a call back. I've already confirmed he'll be there. He has school tomorrow. He can miss 1 day. He's already missed 12 days this semester." The words exploded from Amira. 12 days. She'd been counting. "The school sent a letter, Marcus. They're threatening to report us for truancy." Something flickered across Marcus's face. Not guilt, but calculation. The school doesn't understand that Ethan is building something bigger than 4th grade math. Neither do you, apparently. Amira carried Ethan toward the exit, but Marcus's voice followed them like a shadow. "Think about what you're risking, Amira. I could make one phone call, get a court order restricting your contact with him. Would you prefer that?" She paused at the door, feeling Ethan's fingers grip her shirt, trembling and small. Could Marcus do that? The legal system had already chosen him once. Would they do it again? "Sweet dreams, buddy," Marcus called to Ethan, his tone shifting to sickeningly cheerful. "Tomorrow you're going to be a star." Outside, the evening air hit them like cold water. Ethan coughed against her shoulder, the sound rattling in his small chest. "Can I really miss school tomorrow?" he asked quietly. "No, baby, you're going to school." "But Mr. Marcus said, I'll handle Mr. Marcus." But even as she said it, Amira knew she was lying. She couldn't handle Marcus. She couldn't fight lawyers and court orders and a system that saw her as nothing more than a struggling waitress, while Marcus dressed himself in success and connections. As they reached her beat-up Honda, Amira noticed something across the parking lot. A woman standing by the fence, elderly, watching them with an intensity that made her skin prickle. When their eyes met, the woman didn't look away. She simply nodded once, then disappeared into the evening shadows. "Who was that?" Ethan asked. "I don't know, baby. I don't know." But Amira couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger had been waiting, watching, witnessing something she needed to see. Back in the studio, Marcus pulled out his phone and made a call. "Yeah, it's me. The kid's perfect. We'll have him ready for the campaign." No, the sister won't be a problem. Trust me, I know exactly how to handle her. He hung up and looked at Ethan's abandoned script on the floor. Then he picked up a different document, a contract, unsigned, that would bind Ethan to projects for the next 3 years, without any legal requirement to attend school. All he needed was the right leverage, and he knew exactly where to apply it. Ethan's birthday came on a Thursday. He turned 11 quietly, without fanfare, sitting in Marcus's home office while the man typed emails and made phone calls about maximizing Q4 opportunities. Through the window, Ethan could see kids from his former school gathering at Jeremy Chen's house across the street. Balloons, cake, laughter that sounded like it came from another universe. Jeremy had invited him. 2 weeks ago, he'd handed Ethan a dinosaur-themed invitation during the 15 minutes Marcus had allowed him to attend school for a mandatory state testing day. "It's going to be awesome," Jeremy had said, his gap-toothed smile wide. "We're getting a bounce house and everything." Ethan had tucked the invitation into his pocket, feeling its weight like a secret treasure. That night, he'd asked Marcus, "A birthday party?" Marcus hadn't even looked up from his laptop. "You have a callback that afternoon for the Stellar Sneakers campaign. Do you know what Stellar pays for youth ambassadors?" "But it's Jeremy's party. He's my best friend." "Was your best friend. You're moving beyond that now, buddy. Your real friends are going to be the ones who understand success, the ones at your level." Now, watching through the window, Ethan saw kids racing through the bounce house, their joy a language he was forgetting how to speak. His hand moved to his pocket, finding the small token he'd bought with his allowance last month, a bracelet with a tiny cat charm. Jeremy loved cats. He'd never gotten to give it to him. "Stop staring." Marcus's voice cut through his thoughts. "You're making yourself miserable for no reason. In 5 years, you won't even remember that kid's name." But Ethan would remember. He'd remember every birthday, every recess, every normal moment Marcus stole. The doorbell rang. Marcus frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. Through the window, Ethan saw Mrs. Vega on the front porch, holding a small wrapped box. "Yes?" Marcus opened the door with his professional smile, the one that looked friendly until you noticed his eyes. "Good afternoon, Mr. Holloway. I'm Eleanor Vega, your neighbor from 428. She gestured vaguely toward her house. "I baked too many cookies and thought perhaps young Ethan might enjoy some. I noticed it's his birthday. Saw the date on some mail that was missorted to my box." Marcus's smile tightened. "That's kind, but Ethan's on a strict diet. Audition season, you understand." "I understand many things, Mr. Holloway." Mrs. Vega's voice carried something that made Ethan look up. "I understand that growing boys need proper nutrition, adequate sleep, and regular school attendance. Basic things, foundational." The air between the adults changed, became heavy with things Ethan couldn't quite name. "Well," Marcus said slowly, "I appreciate your concern, but I assure you, Ethan is thriving under my care. Now, if you'll excuse me—" "Of course." Mrs. Vega handed him the box. "For Ethan. Happy birthday, sweetheart." She called past Marcus. After she left, Marcus threw the cookies in the trash. Didn't even open the box. "Busybody neighbors," he muttered. "One more reason we're moving soon. Somewhere more private." But later that night, when Marcus was in the shower, Ethan crept downstairs and rescued the box from the garbage. Inside were homemade chocolate chip cookies and a small note in elegant handwriting. "Your sister is fighting for you. You are not forgotten. Mrs. V." Ethan clutched the note like a lifeline, reading it 17 times before hiding it under his mattress beside the cat bracelet he'd never given away. The next morning, Marcus made an announcement over breakfast. "I have good news, buddy. Remember Kira Lee, the lifestyle influencer?" Ethan nodded. Everyone knew Kira Lee. Millions of followers, brand deals, magazine covers. "Her team reached out. They want you for a special project, a charity campaign for underprivileged kids. It's perfect timing, huge visibility." Marcus leaned forward, his smile wide. "But here's the thing. They specifically requested Asian American representation. And they mentioned they'd love if your sister could make an appearance too. Something about authentic family dynamics." Ethan's heart jumped. "Amira can come?" "Even better, she might have a role." Marcus pulled out his phone, showing Ethan photos from a luxury charity gala. "Think about it. You and your sister together, doing something meaningful, helping kids who need it." For the first time in months, Ethan felt something like hope. Amira, his real family. Maybe this could be the beginning of things getting better. What Ethan didn't see was Marcus's other phone, the one he pulled out after Ethan went to brush his teeth. A text thread with someone named Harrison. Marcus. "The sister's desperate. Court denied her petition last week. She'll do anything to spend time with the kid." Harrison. "You really think she'll agree to impersonate Kira?" Marcus. "She will, because I'm going to offer her exactly what she wants. Time with Ethan, and a hint that I might reconsider the guardianship arrangement. Hook, line, and sinker." Harrison. "And after?" Marcus. "After we use her for the campaign? She becomes complicit. Can't report anything without incriminating herself. It's perfect leverage." Outside, Mrs. Vega watched from her kitchen window as Marcus's shadow moved across his office. She'd seen this pattern before. The manipulation, the careful construction of traps disguised as opportunities. She pulled out her phone and opened a voice recording app. This time she'd be ready. This time she'd capture everything. In his room, Ethan held the cat bracelet and Mrs. Vega's note, whispering a wish he didn't quite believe would come true. "Please let Amira save us. Please." Across town, Amira's phone buzzed with Marcus's message. "10 a.m. tomorrow. Come alone. This is about Ethan's future, and yours." Marcus's office looked more like a showroom than a place of work. Floor-to-ceiling windows cast long streaks of light across polished concrete floors. Behind the oversized desk hung a gallery wall of child stars, framed faces with frozen smiles and tired eyes. Amira walked in like a fighter walking into a fixed match. "Thanks for coming." Marcus gestured to the low leather chair across from his. Lower than his, of course. Power games came free with the coffee here. "Save the charm. Why am I here?" "Straight to business. I respect that," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside, photos from a charity gala. Children grinning beside oversized checks. Champagne flutes held by influencers pretending to care. "Riverside Children's Foundation," he said, tapping the top photo. "Their annual fundraiser's in 2 weeks. It's the biggest thing on the philanthropy circuit." "And?" Kira Lee was supposed to headline. Cancelled. Dubai, I think. Probably filming another brand deal where she holds a smoothie and says, "World Peace." And this has to do with Ethan. How? Marcus smiled, pulling another folder. This one with 2 photos side by side. Kira Lee. Amira. Same cheekbones. Same smile, if you squinted. Same wild, dark curls. You've got to be kidding. One night. You wear the dress, sign a few programs, pose for some selfies. The kids get their moment, the donors stay happy, and we keep the event alive. That's not a solution. That's fraud. Marcus leaned forward, voice lower now. It's illusion. The thing this whole industry runs on. Smiles, edits, filters, lies wrapped in good lighting. My answer's no. I thought you might say that. He tapped the desk once. Which is why I saved the best part for last. Ethan will be there. Amira stilled. He'll be part of the performance segment. You'd get 4 uninterrupted hours, just you and him. No handlers, no studio schedules. When was the last time that happened? 3 months. 3 months since she'd seen him without someone else watching. Their last visit had been in a coffee shop, with Marcus seated nearby pretending not to listen. But always listening. Marcus reached into his drawer and pulled out another folder. Legal letterhead, stamped and formatted to perfection. I've also been reconsidering our arrangement. Maybe you were right. Maybe Ethan does need more time with you. She looked down at the paper. Joint legal guardianship, shared decision-making, regular visitation schedule. Everything she'd begged the court for. All laid out in black and white. Why would you offer this now? Because I care, Marcus said smoothly. And maybe it's time I stopped fighting you and started trusting you. We both love Ethan. Why not work together? Amira lifted the document. Her hands were shaking. 1 event, Marcus added. Just this. Then we talk next steps, formally. I'm ready to file. And if I say no? He smiled again. But this time there was no warmth. Only teeth. Then I tell the foundation that Kira bailed, the event collapses, and Ethan loses this opportunity. And maybe I get a little less generous with your visitations. You know how quickly the court system forgets sisters with checkered records and tight bank accounts? Amira looked back down at the folder. The weight of hope mixed with dread. I need time. 24 hours, Marcus said, already standing. The meeting was over. But Amira, ask yourself, how many more chances will you get to be his sister again? That night, Amira sat in her apartment, the document on her lap, glowing under the desk lamp like a loaded gun. She'd read it 11 times. Couldn't find a single clause that looked off. But her gut screamed anyway. Her phone rang. Mrs. Vega, you met with him. It wasn't a question. How do you... I told you, I've been watching. What did he offer? Amira told her everything. The fake celebrity event. The custody agreement. The deal that smelled too much like hope. Mrs. Vega listened in silence. Then, softly. Amira, I was a federal prosecutor for 32 years. I've seen this dance before. They always make it look clean. 99% truth to hide 1% poison. But what if he's serious this time? If he were serious, there'd be a third party, a court official, a notary, a real agreement, not a carrot. Amira exhaled slowly. I just want my brother back. And that's what makes you dangerous. To yourself. Because love can be leveraged, especially by men like Marcus. Mrs. Vega's voice dropped lower, firmer. If you do this, document everything, record him, screenshot every message. Because when this blows up, and it will, the only thing protecting you will be evidence. Amira sat in the silence after the call, looking out at the city lights. In one of those windows, Ethan was probably asleep. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. 10 a.m. tomorrow. Come alone. This is about Ethan's future, and yours. She stared at it for a long time, then typed her reply. I'll do it, but I want everything in writing, and I want to see Ethan before the event. Alone. The reply came in seconds. Deal. Welcome to the family business. The transformation didn't just change how she looked. It fractured who she was. 3 hours in the chair. Makeup, contour, extensions. Colored lenses to match Kira Lee's amber brown eyes. Voice coaching. Signature drills. Social media crash course. By the time they were done, Amira couldn't recognize the woman in the mirror. Perfect, the stylist said, stepping back. You could fool her mother. Amira forced a smile. Inside, she felt hollow. Like the more perfect the reflection became, the less she existed underneath it. From the corner, Marcus gave a small nod. Kira tilts her head when she laughs. Light touch to the collarbone. Practice that. And don't forget the signature. Curl the K. She didn't reply. Just stared at her lips in the mirror. Lips that would soon be signing autographs for someone else's fans. The gala shimmered like a dream, a converted warehouse, now dripping in fairy lights and white tablecloths, children in miniature suits, adults in cocktail dresses, music, champagne, laughter rehearsed 1,000 times, and Ethan. She saw him immediately, standing by the silent auction table in a black suit that swallowed him whole. His eyes scanned the crowd like a stranger at his own party. Then he saw her. Recognition bloomed, tentative at first. His face lit up. That smile, the one she hadn't seen in full since he was 8. But before she could move, Marcus's hand gripped her elbow. "After the signing," he said. "Not yet." And so the show began. The line curled like a question mark. Children holding notebooks, posters, selfies queued for someone who wasn't real. "Hi, I'm Emma. I love your videos." "You changed my life. My mom says I'm your biggest fan." Each child a reminder. This wasn't just a lie. It was a theft of belief. Amira smiled, signed, took selfies, repeated phrases she'd memorized 5 hours earlier, until Sophie, a girl no older than 7, notebook in hand, pages filled with sketches, little outfits drawn in colored pencil, labeled carefully. "These are all the outfits from your last video," Sophie whispered, eyes wide. "I watched it like 10 times. Amira's hand hovered over the page. The drawings weren't perfect, but they were careful. They were hopeful. "My mom says I might be a designer someday," Sophie said. "Like you." Amira blinked back a sting in her eyes. "You don't need to wait to become one," she said softly. "You already are." Sophie gasped. "Do you really mean that?" Amira nodded. And for the first time that night, her smile was real. Sophie hugged her, then ran off, cradling her notebook like treasure. Behind her, Marcus clapped once. "That was perfect, heartfelt, genuine. You're a natural." She turned to him slowly. "I just lied to 30 children." "You gave them joy," he replied. "There's a difference." Later, when the crowd thinned, he gave her the nod. Finally, Ethan came running, not to Kira Lee, but to the sister hidden beneath the mascara and beach waves. "You looked just like her," he whispered. "For a second I forgot it was you." They found a quiet spot on the warehouse steps. Just the two of them. No handlers, no scripts. 20 minutes. "Did you get my texts?" he asked. "All of them," she said. "Even the ones Mr. Marcus blocked." He looked down. "He says I don't need a phone all the time. Just for auditions and PR. She reached for his hand. "That's not normal, Ethan." He shrugged. "I'm not normal anymore." Silence. Then, quietly. "I don't want to shine, Mira. I just want to go to school. Play soccer. Eat cereal for dinner. Be tired from playing, not pretending." Amira's throat closed. Before she could respond, Marcus reappeared. "Time's up." Ethan stood. But not before slipping something into her hand. A tiny paper fold. She opened it later. Inside was the cat bracelet, still warm from his wrist. Back at the warehouse doors, Amira hesitated. Looking back at the stage, the lights, the sound of children still laughing. "I lied to all of them," she said to the air. Mrs. Vega stepped out of the shadows, as if summoned. "And how many of them will go to bed tonight feeling seen?" she asked. "Sometimes, lies dressed in kindness do less harm than truths dressed in cruelty." "But it still feels wrong." "Good. That means you're not like him." Amira said nothing, but she didn't let go of the bracelet. Not yet. Inside the building, Marcus was already planning the next show. Already pitching Kira's return appearance. already turning Amira's guilt into bookings, into leverage, into chains. But this time, someone else had been watching. Mrs. Vega had attended as a donor, a silent observer in the crowd. And in her bag, she carried photos, video, documents, including the custody agreement Marcus had shown Amira. Only, the watermark under UV light told a different story. Template, not for legal use. 3 weeks after the gala, Amira's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Photos, articles, hashtags. Kira Lee brings hope to children. Fashion icon touches hearts at fundraiser. Kira for president? But Amira wasn't flattered. She was exhausted. Meanwhile, Marcus was thrilled. The hospital wants you next. The literacy group after that. You're hot, Amira, real hot. She sat stiffly in the leather chair across from him. Same office, different power dynamic. Only now, she wasn't just the sister. She was the product. I did what you asked, one event. Where's the custody agreement? Marcus smiled like a man offering a glass of water while stealing the well. Right here. He tapped a folder. But let's talk timing. She didn't like that word. Timing. It always came right before manipulation. We file now, while you're impersonating someone? Looks sketchy. Trust me, it's smarter to wait. Let the buzz cool down. File when it's clean. And what happens in the meantime? You schedule 5 more events and string me along? Marcus leaned back, steepling his fingers. Amira, I'm giving you something big here. Let's not sabotage it. I want 2 hours with Ethan, alone, no handlers, or I'm out. Marcus blinked. He didn't expect the demand. Didn't expect that voice in her to come back. Fine. Tomorrow, that park you like. 3 p.m. His voice was calm. But for the first time, she saw something in his eyes. A crack. The next day, the sky was soft and gray, as Amira sat on a park bench, staring at the swing set. Then she saw him, Ethan, in sneakers too big and a hoodie too small, walking slowly toward her like he wasn't sure it was real. The moment he reached her, he collapsed into her arms like he'd been holding his breath for a year. They did nothing extraordinary. Ice cream, swings, jokes that didn't land, laughter that did. And then the whisper. Jeremy moved away. Amira looked up. What? Didn't even get to say goodbye. His dad got a job somewhere far. I'm sorry, baby. It's okay. I probably wouldn't have been allowed to see him anyway. He said it flat, like he wasn't sad, just resigned. Like childhood was something he no longer expected to keep. Oh, he added, Mr. Marcus says I'm going to Vancouver for a show, 6 months. Amira froze. He said what? Big role. They already called the school. Amira's heart dropped into her stomach. He says I'll have a tutor there, like on set, but Mira, I don't want to go. His voice cracked on the word want. I don't want to act anymore, not like this. Amira stared at him. Hand broke. That night she didn't knock. She stormed through Marcus's door like a hurricane in boots. He was in his office, of course, printing contracts, smiling at his own lies. You're sending him to Vancouver? Marcus didn't even flinch. It's a great opportunity. He's 10. He's talented. He's exhausted. Marcus stood, calm, cold. Let's get one thing straight, Amira. He stopped being your brother the moment the court made me his guardian. He's my responsibility, my asset. Asset? Her voice was quiet. Too quiet. He's an investment. I've put in the hours. I'm managing him like any smart adult would. You're bleeding him dry. I'm securing his future. No, you're securing your paycheck. He scoffed. Do you think childhood lasts forever? He's got 6 years, tops, before his value drops. Puberty ruins everything. He's not a product, Marcus. He's not a kid either, not anymore. She was shaking, with rage, with grief, with guilt. You want to take him to court? For what? Feelings? Meanwhile, I have images, data, contracts, praise from brands. What do you have? I have the truth. Marcus smiled. And I have evidence. You impersonated a celebrity for profit. I have witnesses, bank transfers. Want to play that game? She couldn't breathe. You told me there was no money involved. And you believed me? He leaned in. Here's the deal, Amira. Back off or I bury you. You'll see Ethan through a glass wall at best. If you're lucky. If you're not, I hope orange jumpsuits come in your size. And then, that's quite a confession. Marcus spun. In the doorway, Mrs. Vega. Phone in hand, red recording light still blinking. This is private property, Marcus barked. The door was open, she said sweetly, and this is a one-party consent state. She stepped inside. No longer a neighbor. A storm in pearls. I've filed emergency custody. I've documented every violation. Coogan Act, truancy, exploitation. You're finished. You have no right. I have law, I have precedent, I have receipts. She turned to Amira. You're the challenger. Are you ready to fight? Amira looked at the man who stole her brother's light and whispered, I was born ready. The courtroom on Monday morning was nothing like the sterile, impersonal space where Amira had lost custody the first time. Judge Rebecca Morrison, different from before, sat with a file 3 inches thick on her desk. Mrs. Vega's evidence. Marcus arrived with 2 lawyers in expensive suits, confidence radiating from every gesture. But Amira noticed something new in his eyes when he saw Mrs. Vega sitting at their table, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, briefcase open, legal pads covered in notes. Fear. Your Honor, Marcus's lead attorney began, this is a frivolous petition filed by a neighbor with no legal standing. Ms. Vega has standing as a mandated reporter of child abuse, Judge Morrison interrupted, scanning the documents. And she's presented substantial evidence of educational neglect, labor law violations, and financial exploitation. We'll be hearing this case in full. The next 3 hours were brutal. Mrs. Vega presented everything. Attendance records showing 42 absences in 1 semester. Bank statements proving Marcus had pocketed $47,000 of Ethan's earnings without establishing the legally required Coogan trust account. Time logs documenting 14-hour workdays for a 10-year-old. Photos of Ethan's deteriorating health. Weight loss, dark circles, visible exhaustion. And the recording. Investment, 6 years of commercial viability. Nobody working retail. Marcus's own words, played in open court, stripped away every pretense. The lawyers tried to object, but California's single-party consent law was clear. The recording was admissible. Then came Ethan. The judge had ordered an in-chambers interview. Just her, Ethan, and a child advocate. When they emerged 30 minutes later, Ethan's eyes were red from crying, but his expression was different. Lighter, like someone had removed a weight he'd carried so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. Judge Morrison's ruling was swift and thorough. Mr. Holloway, your guardianship is hereby terminated effective immediately. Ethan Chen will be placed in the temporary custody of his sister, Amira Chen, pending a full custody hearing in 30 days. Additionally, I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges related to child labor violations, financial exploitation, and fraud. Marcus shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. That boy's childhood is more important than any career. Judge Morrison's voice was steel. And Mr. Holloway, if I ever see you in my courtroom representing a child again, I'll hold you in contempt so fast your lawyers won't have time to object. We're done here. Outside the courthouse, Amira held Ethan as he sobbed. Not sad tears, but the kind that come when pressure finally releases, when the impossible suddenly becomes real. Can I really come home with you? He asked between gasps. You can really come home? Do I have to audition anymore? Never again. Not unless you want to. I don't want to. His voice was small but certain. I just want to be a kid. Mrs. Vega stood a few feet away, giving them privacy, but watching with a grandmother's soft smile. Amira caught her eye and mouthed, "Thank you." Mrs. Vega nodded once, then gestured toward her car. "Come on, let's get Ethan's things before Marcus can interfere." But when they arrived at Marcus's house, they found it nearly empty. The photos of child stars had been ripped from the walls. The filing cabinet stood open, papers scattered like ash. And the office safe, the one Marcus had used to store contracts and cash, hung open and hollow. He ran, Mrs. Vega said quietly, surveying the destruction. Probably figured this was coming and liquidated everything he could. "What about Ethan's money?" Amira asked, fear creeping back in. "The $47,000. Gone. Likely transferred offshore or withdrawn in cash before the hearing. The DA will pursue it, but..." Mrs. Vega's expression was grim. "These cases rarely recover the funds. I'm sorry, Amira." $47,000. Months of work. Ethan's childhood, quite literally bought and paid for, and then stolen. In Ethan's room, they found his belongings packed haphazardly, clothes thrown in trash bags, homework scattered across the floor, his mattress stripped bare. But on the dresser, carefully placed in the center, was a small wooden box. Inside, the cat bracelet, the one Ethan had bought for Jeremy's birthday and never gave away. He'd kept it all this time. Through every audition, every rejection, every night crying himself to sleep, he'd kept that one symbol of the childhood he'd lost. Ethan picked it up, the metal cool against his palm. "Can I give this to Jeremy, even though he moved away?" "We'll find him," Amira promised. "We'll find his address, and you can mail it with a letter." "And I can tell him I'm sorry I missed his birthday?" "You can tell him whatever you want, baby." That night, in Amira's tiny apartment, in a home that was cramped and humble, but finally theirs, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, writing a letter. The words came slowly, carefully, each one chosen with the precision of someone who'd been denied his own voice for too long. "Dear Jeremy, I'm sorry I missed your party. I wanted to come, but I couldn't. It wasn't because I didn't care. I cared so much I bought you this bracelet because I know you love cats. I'm living with my sister now. Maybe if you ever come back to visit, we could hang out. I'm going back to school and everything. I missed being your friend." Your friend. Ethan Amira read it over his shoulder, tears streaming silently down her face. "It's perfect," she whispered. Later, after Ethan had fallen asleep, in a real bed, in a safe room, without an early call time hanging over his head, Amira sat with Mrs. Vega on the tiny balcony. "The money's really gone?" "Most likely. Marcus knew how to hide assets, probably learned from other managers in the industry." Mrs. Vega paused. "I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." "He's safe. He's home. That's what I wanted." Amira's voice was firm. "Money can be earned back. Childhood can't." Mrs. Vega pulled out a small envelope. "This is for you. Don't open it now. Wait until I leave." "What is it?" "Let's just say I learned a long time ago that sometimes justice needs a little help. And sometimes old federal attorneys still have friends in useful places." After Mrs. Vega left, Amira opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $15,000 and a note. "This is from my daughter's trust, the one I couldn't protect her well enough to need. Use it for Ethan. Give him the childhood she never got to finish. And remember, The best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's living well despite what they tried to take from you. Eleanor Amira sat there until dawn, holding that check, understanding that sometimes angels don't announce themselves with trumpets. Sometimes they're just quiet neighbors who refuse to look away. And sometimes the victory isn't getting everything back. Sometimes it's just getting back what matters most. 6 months later, Ethan stood on a stage. But this time there were no cameras, no directors, no Marcus counting money in the wings. Just a middle school auditorium filled with families and the smell of slightly burnt cookies from the fundraiser table. And Ethan holding a piece of paper with his speech for the Courage and Character Award. His hands trembled slightly. Old habits died hard. But when he looked out at the audience and saw Amira in the third row, her smile steady and proud, the shaking stopped. "My name is Ethan Chen," he began, his voice stronger than it had been in years. "And a year ago, I thought my worth was measured in auditions, callbacks, and booking rates." In the audience, kids who'd only known Ethan for a few months listened with the intensity of those who sense a real story, not a performance. Truth. I thought being successful meant being tired all the time. Missing school, missing birthdays, missing friends. The person who was in charge of me back then told me that was the price of being special, that normal kids didn't understand what it took to be a star. Ethan paused, finding Amira's eyes again. She nodded, giving him permission to continue. "But I was wrong. Being special doesn't mean working until you forget what it feels like to play. It doesn't mean missing your best friend's birthday party because someone older than you decided your time wasn't your own." His hand moved to his wrist, where the cat bracelet now hung. Too small to wear properly, but there nonetheless. He'd gotten it back from Jeremy last month when the Chen family had traveled 3 hours to Jeremy's new town. The two boys had picked up their friendship like no time had passed at all, building Legos and talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. Jeremy had been wearing the bracelet, had kept it safe all those months. "I want to thank my sister, Amira," Ethan continued, his voice cracking slightly. "Because she didn't give up even when I thought she couldn't win. Even when people with power and money told her she wasn't good enough, she kept showing up, kept fighting. And that's the real kind of courage. Not the kind they put in movies, but the kind that shows up even when you're scared you'll lose." Amira was openly crying now, but she was smiling too, and in the seat beside her, Mrs. Vega dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "And I want to thank Mrs. Vega, who saw something wrong and didn't pretend it wasn't there. Because it's easy to look away when bad things happen to someone else. It's harder to care when it's inconvenient. She cared anyway. Mrs. Vega had aged in the past year. She'd turned 78 in March, but her eyes still held that sharp intelligence that had terrified Marcus in court. She raised her hand in a small wave, and Ethan waved back. "The award committee asked me to talk about courage and character. And I guess what I learned is that character is what you do when someone powerful tells you to do something wrong. It's saying no, even when saying yes would be easier. It's protecting people who need protecting, even when you're scared." He folded the paper, going off script now. The real Ethan, not performing, just being. "I'm 11 years old. I'm in 6th grade. My favorite subject is art, and I'm really bad at math. I have a best friend named Jeremy who lives far away, but we video chat every weekend. My sister works 2 jobs to support us, and sometimes we have cereal for dinner because we're both too tired to cook, and that's okay. I'm not a star. I'm not special. I'm just a kid." He smiled, the kind of smile that comes from deep relief, from peace. "And that's the best thing I've ever been." The applause started small, polite recognition, then swelled as people began to understand what they'd just witnessed. Not a child actor's performance, but a survivor's testimony. a childhood reclaimed. After the ceremony, while Ethan collected congratulations from teachers and classmates, Amira stepped outside for air. The evening was cool, the sky streaked with orange and purple. Mrs. Vega found her there. "He did well," the older woman said simply. "He did perfectly. He was himself." "That's the highest compliment, isn't it?" Mrs. Vega leaned against the railing. "Being yourself instead of what someone else needs you to be." Amira thought about the charity gala, about becoming Kyra Lee, about all the ways she'd compromised trying to save Ethan. "Do you think those kids, the ones at the foundation event, do you think they'll ever know they were lied to?" "Does it matter?" Mrs. Vega asked gently. They had a happy night. They believed in something that gave them joy. The lie didn't hurt them, Amira. Marcus's lies hurt Ethan. There's a difference between a performance that brings happiness and exploitation that brings profit. That feels like moral gymnastics. Perhaps. Or perhaps it's acknowledging that we all play roles sometimes. The question is whether we're doing it to help or to harm. Mrs. Vega smiled. "You wore that mask to buy time with your brother. That's love, not malice. Don't carry guilt for loving fiercely." Inside, Ethan's laughter rang out, pure and unself-conscious, the sound of a child who'd forgotten what it felt like to relax, finally remembering. "Did you ever hear from Marcus?" Amira asked. "The DA dropped the criminal charges. Insufficient evidence after he destroyed the files. But he's been blacklisted in the industry. No agency will touch him. No parent will trust him. He didn't go to prison, but he lost his career. Sometimes that's justice enough." "Is it?" "It has to be. Because the alternative, seeking perfect vengeance, that destroys you more than it hurts them." Mrs. Vega turned to face Amira fully. "You've already won. You have your brother back. He's thriving. He's healing. That's not just victory, that's everything." Later that night, as Amira tucked Ethan into bed, a ritual she'd reclaimed with fierce protectiveness, he held up the cat bracelet. "I'm going to keep this forever," he said. "To remember." "Remember what?" "That some things are worth more than money or being famous. That the people who really love you don't care if you're a star. They just want you to be happy." Amira kissed his forehead. "That's exactly right, baby. Mira, do you think I could ever act again? Like, if I wanted to, when I'm older?" "If you want to, yes. But only if it makes you happy. Only if you choose it." "Good." He yawned, settling deeper into his pillow. "Because I think I might want to, someday, but like in school plays, not the Marcus way, the normal way." "The normal way is perfect." As she turned off the light, Ethan called out one more time. "I love you, Mira." "I love you too, Ethan. Forever." In her room, Amira pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photos. There was one from today. Ethan on stage, holding his award, beaming with genuine pride. Not performing joy. Feeling it. She made it her wallpaper, replacing the old photo from 2 years ago when their mother was still alive, and their world hadn't yet shattered and reassembled into this new, harder, better shape. In her house next door, Mrs. Vega sat at her desk and pulled out a worn photo album. Her daughter's face smiled from yellowed photographs. A child actor from the 1970s who'd never gotten the protection Ethan had, who'd been lost to an industry that ground her down until there was nothing left. "I couldn't save you, Margaret," she whispered to the photo. "But I saved him. Does that count? Does that balance the scale?" The photo, of course, didn't answer. But in the quiet of her home, Mrs. Vega felt something settle. Not quite peace, but close enough. One child saved wouldn't erase one child lost. But it meant something. It had to mean something. At Marcus Holloway's new apartment, a cramped studio 3 states away, far from the industry that had once welcomed him, he sat alone with a bottle of whiskey and a laptop showing social media posts from his former clients. Kids who'd gone on to book major roles with other managers. Kids whose parents had dropped him the moment the whispers started about his practices. He'd lost everything. The reputation, the clients, the money he'd socked away in accounts that the court had eventually frozen. But worst of all, he'd lost the one thing he'd never expected to miss. Purpose. For years, he'd told himself he was building stars, creating opportunities, making dreams come true. But without kids to manage, without that identity, he was just a man who'd stolen childhoods for profit and convinced himself it was mentorship. He raised his glass to the empty room. "To the business," he said bitterly. No one answered. And in the silence that followed, Marcus Holloway finally understood what he'd spent a lifetime running from. He'd never mattered to anyone. He'd only mattered for what he could extract. But 3 states away, in a small apartment filled with laughter and mismatched furniture and the smell of slightly burnt pizza, Amira and Ethan mattered to each other completely. Not for what they could do or earn or achieve, just for being there, just for not giving up, just for being exactly who they were. And in the end, that was the only thing that had ever mattered at all.